Some bargains should never be broken, no matter how much wealth tempts you. In the ancient Ijaw fishing village of Okporo Ama, along the banks of the mighty River Nun, a poor fisherman named Tubo made a deal with something that was never meant to be defied. The goddess of the river gave him riches beyond imagination and one simple warning. For 7 years, he kept his word. Then, on one fateful morning, when greed whispered louder than wisdom, Tubo broke his promise. What happened next was so horrifying that fishermen still refused to speak his name on the water, lest they invoke the same curse that turned him into a living nightmare. But to understand the curse, you must first understand the bargain. And to understand the bargain, you must know what desperation can make a man willing to risk. Tubo was the poorest fisherman in Okporo Ama, and in a village of fishermen, that was saying something. While other men returned from the River Nun with canoes heavy with tilapia, catfish, and the prized Nile perch, Tubo's nets came up empty day after day, while others built larger huts and took second wives. Tubo could barely feed his first wife, Prey, and their 2 small children. Perhaps the river spirits are angry with you, Old Boma, the village elder, suggested one evening as Tubo sat mending his tattered net for the 100th time. I pour libations, Tubo protested. I say the prayers. I follow all the customs. Then perhaps, Boma said carefully, lowering his voice, you fish in the wrong waters. Tubo looked up sharply. What do you mean? The old man glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. There is a bend in the river, 3 miles north, where the water runs deep and black. They say the fish there are as large as a man's torso, so plentiful they practically leap into boats. Then why doesn't everyone fish there? Tubo asked, though something in his stomach already knew the answer. Because, Boma whispered, that is where Ineobong dwells, the river goddess, the fierce one. Men who fish those waters either return with nothing, or they don't return at all. 20 years ago, a fisherman named Keme tried his luck there. They found his canoe floating empty, his nets full of stones, and his body was never recovered. Tubo felt a chill, despite the warm evening air. Then why would you tell me about such a place? Old Boma studied him with rheumy eyes. Because desperate men do desperate things. And I see desperation in your face, young Tubo. Just remember, if you go to those waters, take nothing for granted. The goddess is fierce, yes, but she is also fair in her own way. Respect her, and perhaps, he shrugged, perhaps you'll be luckier than Kem. That night, Tubo lay beside his sleeping wife, listening to his children's hungry whimpers in the darkness. His youngest, barely 3 years old, had cried herself to sleep because there had been no evening meal. Again, his older son had stopped complaining about hunger weeks ago, which somehow was worse. I cannot go on like this, Tubo thought. I would rather die trying than watch my family starve slowly. Before dawn, while the village still slept, Tubo pushed his small canoe into the River Nun and paddled north, toward the forbidden waters where the goddess dwelled. When the bend in the river revealed itself just as the sun broke over the horizon, Tubo recognized it immediately. The water here was different, darker, deeper. It didn't ripple like normal water, but moved with a strange, syrupy thickness, as if something lived beneath its surface, breathing. The forest on both banks grew denser here, the trees leaning over the water like spectators waiting for a show. Strange birds with white eyes watched from the branches. The air smelled of wet earth and something else, something ancient and wild. Tubo's hands trembled as he prepared his nets. Just once, he told himself. Just this one time, and if I catch enough, I'll never return. He cast his nets into the dark water. Immediately the net grew heavy, impossibly heavy. Tubo pulled with all his strength, his arms burning with the effort. When the net finally broke the surface, his breath caught in his throat. Fish. Hundreds of them, each one massive, gleaming, perfect. More fish than he should caught in the entire past year. His canoe tilted dangerously under the weight. By the ancestors, he whispered, laughing in disbelief. Old Boma was right. Was he now? The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. From the water, from the air, from inside Tubo's own chest. It was a woman's voice, but deeper than any woman's voice should be, with an undertone like distant thunder. Tubo froze, his hand still gripping the net. The water beside his canoe began to swirl, forming a whirlpool that grew larger and larger. From its center, something rose. She was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Ine Ubong, the river goddess, stood on the surface of the water as if it was solid ground. In her skin was the color of river clay, patterns of scales shimmering across her shoulders and arms. Her hair wasn't hair at all but water, living water that flowed continuously down her back, feeding back into the river. Her eyes were completely black, like the deepest parts of the ocean, and when she smiled, Tubo saw that her teeth were small, sharp, and numerous. She wore nothing but strands of river pearls and the bones of men who had tried to steal from her domain. So, she said, her voice making the air vibrate, another thief comes to take what is mine. Tubo fell to his knees in the canoe, the boat rocking wildly. Great goddess, please, I didn't know. I knew, but I didn't think. Silence. The word hit him like a physical force. Tubo's jaw snapped shut. Ineubong circled his canoe slowly, studying him the way a cat studies a mouse. You knew these were my waters. You knew the stories, yet you came anyway. Tell me why I shouldn't drag you down to my palace beneath the riverbed and add your bones to my collection. Tubo wanted to speak, but found he couldn't. The goddess had commanded silence, and his body obeyed. She laughed, a sound like waterfalls crashing on rocks. You may answer now, little thief. I have a family, Tubo managed, his voice shaking. 2 children, a wife. We're starving. Every day I go out on the river, and every day I return with nothing. I don't know what I've done to anger the spirits, but my children cry from hunger. Great goddess, I would rather face you than hear my daughter weep for food I cannot provide. The goddess was silent for a long moment, her black eyes boring into him. Interesting, she finally said. Most men who come here lie. They claim they didn't know, or they were blown off course, or some other pathetic excuse. You, at least, speak truth. You admit you are a thief. Yes, great goddess. And you claim it is for love of your family, not for greed? Yes, great goddess. We shall see about that. She reached out one hand. Her fingers were webbed, Tubo noticed, with claws like polished shells, and tilted his chin up, forcing him to meet her terrible gaze. I will give you a test, little fisherman. Answer wisely, and perhaps I will let you live. Answer foolishly, and you will join Kim in my palace. Tubo's heart hammered in his chest. I will try, great goddess. Good. She released him and stepped back, still standing impossibly on the water's surface. Tell me, what is the difference between a fisherman and a thief? Tubo blinked. Of all the questions he had expected, this wasn't one of them. His mind raced. This had to be a riddle, a test of wisdom. The goddess was watching him with those bottomless black eyes, waiting. A thief, Tubo said slowly, thinking through each word, takes what doesn't belong to him and gives nothing in return. A fisherman takes from the river, yes, but he also gives back. We pour libations, we thank the spirits, We never take more than we need. We don't just take, we participate. We're part of the river's cycle. The goddess's expression didn't change. And yet, you came here today to take my fish without asking permission. How is that not theft? Tubo swallowed hard. You're right, great goddess. It is theft. I called myself a fisherman, but today I acted as a thief, and I am ashamed. For the first time, Ineubong's stern expression softened slightly. Not much, but enough that Tubo dared to hope he might survive this encounter. You have wisdom, little thief, she said. Wisdom and honesty, rare qualities in men. And you came here not for greed, but for love. I have watched you, Tubo, son of Abiye. I have seen you share your meager catches with widows. I have seen you help repair other men's nets even when your own were torn. You are poor, yes, but your heart has remained decent. She paused, and the water around them began to glow with a faint blue-green light. I will make you an offer. An offer? Tubo repeated, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. Yes. Ineubong gestured to his net, still full of enormous fish. You may take this fish, and you may return here every 7 days to cast your nets in my waters. I will ensure they are always full, fuller than any other fisherman's in Okporo Ama. You will become wealthy beyond your current imagination. Tubo's eyes widened. Great goddess, why would you offer me such a gift? Because I am bored, she said simply. The river is my domain, yes, but it is lonely. The fish do not speak. The water does not change. Centuries pass, and I watch fishermen come and go, all the same, all equally greedy or cowardly or stupid. But you, she leaned closer. You are interesting. You speak truth, even when lies might save you. I wish to see what you will do with wealth. Will you remain the decent man I have observed? Or will prosperity corrupt you like it does all the others? I will remain decent, Tubo promised quickly. I swear it. Our great goddess, we shall see. Her smile showed all those sharp little teeth. But such a gift cannot be given freely. There must be balance. For every blessing, a condition. Tubo's hope faltered. What condition? Ineubong held up one webbed hand, extending a single clawed finger. One rule. Simple, clear, absolute. You may fish my waters every 7 days, and you may take as many fish as your nets can hold. But you must never. Her voice grew deeper, more ominous. You must never cast your nets on the night of the full moon. On those nights, these waters belong entirely to me, and what swims here is not for mortal eyes or mortal hands. The full moon, Tubo repeated. I must never fish during the full moon? That's all? That is all. The goddess's black eyes glittered. Can you follow this one simple rule, little fisherman? Can you resist the temptation when the moon is brightest and the fish are most plentiful? Yes, Tubo said immediately. Great goddess, for such a blessing, I would follow 100 rules. One is sufficient. She waved her hand, and the blue-green light in the water intensified. Go now. Return in 7 days, and your nets will fill again. Grow wealthy, feed your family, build a fine house. But remember, her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow echoed louder than a shout. Break my rule, and you will wish I had drowned you today. I won't break it, Tubo promised. I swear on my children's lives. Then we have a bargain. Ineubong sank back into the water like a stone, leaving only ripples where she had stood. Her voice came one last time from beneath the surface. 7 days, Tubo, son of Abiye. I will be watching. Then she was gone, and Tubo was alone in his canoe with a net full of the largest, most beautiful fish he had ever seen. His hands shook as he paddled back toward Okporo Ama, not from fear, but from barely contained excitement. Never on the full moon, he thought. That's such a small price to pay for wealth. If only he knew how small prices could grow into unpayable debts. If you love African folktales, where choices have consequences, subscribe now and stay with the story, because this was only the beginning. When Tubo returned to Okporo Ama with his impossible catch, the village went silent. Men stopped their work. Women ceased their cooking. Children paused mid-game. Everyone stared as Tubo pulled his canoe onto the shore, revealing a net so full of massive fish that it seemed impossible one man could have caught them. Tubo, his wife Prey gasped, running toward him. What? How? Where did you get all these? The river was generous today, Tubo said carefully. He decided on the paddleback that he would tell no one about the goddess. Such secrets were dangerous to share. The village trader, a shrewd man named Owe, pushed through the crowd. His eyes widened when he saw the quality of Tubo's catch. I've never seen fish this size, this fresh. Owe pulled out his purse. I'll give you 50 manillas for the lot. 50 manillas. That was more than Tubo usually made in 2 months. 70. Tubo countered, surprising himself with his own boldness. Owe laughed. You drive a hard bargain for a man who usually begs for advances. 60. And that's my final offer. Done. Money changed hands. The crowd murmured in amazement. Tubo had never held so much wealth at once in his entire life. That night, his family ate fish stew with yams, palm oil, and vegetables. A feast they hadn't enjoyed in years. His children's laughter filled their small hut, and Prey wept with relief and joy. Whatever blessing has come to us, she whispered to Tubo as they lay in the darkness, may it continue. It will, Tubo promised, thinking of the goddess's bargain. Every 7 days, it will continue. And it did. 7 days later, Tubo returned to the forbidden bend in the river. He cast his nets, and the filled immediately with the same enormous perfect fish. The goddess did not appear, but he felt her watching him from beneath the water, judging, waiting. He returned home and sold his catch for another 60 manillas. 7 days after that, the same, and again, and again. Within 3 months, Tubo had built a new hut, larger, with a proper roof and sturdy walls. Within 6 months, he'd purchased a second canoe and hired 2 young men to help him process his catches. Within a year, he was the wealthiest fisherman in Okporo Ama, and people spoke his name with respect and envy. How do you do it? Other fishermen asked constantly. What's your secret? I pray to the river spirits, Tubo would say with a modest smile, and I work hard. But secretly, he began to feel proud, dangerously proud. He started to believe that his wealth came not from the goddess's gift, but from his own cleverness. After all, hadn't he been smart enough to answer her riddle, brave enough to face her, wise enough to accept her bargain? The goddess's warning about the full moon became just another rule to remember, like mending his nets or paying his workers. It lost its weight, its sacred importance. This was his first mistake. His second mistake was forgetting that pride and greed are siblings, and where one grows, the other follows close behind. 7 years passed. 7 prosperous, abundant years. Tubo now owned 5 canoes and employed 15 men. His compound was the largest in Okporo Ama, with multiple huts, a smoking house for preserving fish, and even a small dock. He had taken a second wife, as wealthy men often did, and both his wives wore fine wrappers and coral beads. His children, who had once cried from hunger, were now plump and spoiled. His oldest son was being educated by a trader from the coast who taught him to read and write in the white man's language. People came from neighboring villages to buy fish from Tubo the Blessed, as he was now known. He sold to traders who took his fish to markets 3 days' journey away. Money flowed into his hands, like the river itself. But something had changed in Tubo. The grateful, humble fisherman, who had once shared his meager catches with widows, now haggled aggressively over every manila. The man who had helped repair other men's nets now charged fees for his advice. The fisherman who had wept over his starving children now barely noticed when his workers' children went hungry. Wealth had not corrupted him completely. Not yet, but it had planted seeds. Seeds that would soon sprout into something dark and consuming. It started with a simple observation. One evening, as Tubo counted his money in his private hut, he noticed a pattern. His most profitable catches always came during the weeks when the moon was full or nearly full. The fish seemed larger, more numerous, of even higher quality. The full moon, he thought, and immediately remembered the goddess's warning. He hadn't fished during a full moon in 7 years. He had kept that rule faithfully, even when it meant losing a day of potential profit. But now, for the first time, he began to calculate what that rule was costing him. If he caught 60 manilas worth of fish every 7 days, and if he avoided fishing once per month during the full moon, then he was losing approximately 8 profitable days per year. 8 days that, given the increased quality of fish during full moons, I might be worth not 60, but 80, or even 100 manilas each. He was losing potentially 800 manilas per year. The thought consumed him. That's enough to build another hut, he reasoned. Enough to buy a wife for my eldest son. Enough to invest in a trading canoe. He tried to push the thoughts away. After all, he had promised the goddess. He had sworn on his children's lives. But the whisper of greed, once started, is hard to silence. Just once, he muttered to himself in the darkness. What harm could come from fishing just once during a full moon? The goddess hasn't appeared in 7 years. Perhaps she's forgotten about me. Perhaps the rule was just a test, and I've already passed by following it this long. His second wife, Adanma, stirred beside him. Did you say something, husband? Just thinking aloud, Tubo replied. But his heart was racing. The next full moon was 3 nights away. For 3 days, Tubo wrestled with temptation. Part of him remembered the goddess's terrible beauty, her sharp teeth, a warning that breaking the rule would make him wish he'd been drowned. But another part, the part that had grown fat on 7 years of wealth, whispered that he was being foolish. You're not the desperate fisherman you once were, this voice said. You're Tubo the Blessed. You've earned the right to take a little more. On the morning of the full moon, Tubo made his decision. He would fish, just this once. The night of the full moon was impossibly bright. The moon hung huge and silverous in the sky, turning the River Nun into a path of liquid light. The water seemed to glow from within, beautiful and inviting. Tubo pushed his canoe into the water at midnight, when the moon was at its zenith. He told no one where he was going, not his wives, not his workers, not even his closest friend. Deep in his heart, he knew what he was doing was wrong, but greed had made him reckless. As he paddled toward the forbidden bend, part of him expected the goddess to appear and strike him down immediately. But the water remained calm. No voice called out. No terrible figure rose from the depths. See, the greedy voice in his head said triumphantly. She's not even watching. The rule meant nothing. Tubo reached the deep, dark bend in the river. Under the full moon's light, the water here didn't look dark at all. It shimmered like polished obsidian. Beautiful, beyond description. He cast his nets. Immediately, they grew heavy, heavier than they had ever been before. Tubo pulled with all his strength, in excitement building in his chest. When the nets broke the surface, he actually laughed aloud. The fish inside were enormous, each one the size of a small child, gleaming silver in the moonlight. But there was something else in the net too, something that glittered and sparkled. River pearls, hundreds of them, tangled among the fish. Each pearl was the size of a thumb, perfectly round, luminous. They were worth a fortune, more than Tubo could make in 5 years of fishing. The goddess's pearls, Tubo whispered, remembering the strands she had worn around her neck. He should have cast the net back immediately. He should have begged forgiveness and fled. But greed had him now, had him completely, and it would not let go. She hasn't stopped me, he reasoned. Perhaps she's giving me these as a reward for 7 years of faithful service. Perhaps the rule about the full moon was never absolute after all. He pulled the net into his canoe, pearls and all. The moment the last pearl cleared the water's surface, the river went completely still. The gentle current stopped. The small waves ceased. Even the sound of water lapping against the canoe fell silent. It was as if the entire river had drawn a breath and was holding it. Then, from deep beneath the surface, a light began to glow. Not the beautiful blue-green light Tubo remembered from 7 years ago, but an angry red-orange, like coals in a fire pit. The water around his canoe began to bubble. "No," Tubo whispered, his triumph turning to ice-cold fear. "No, no, no." In Ubong rose from the depths, but she was not as she had been before. The beautiful, terrible goddess had transformed into something of pure nightmare. Her skin had turned from river clay to scales. Real scales, sharp and overlapping, covering every inch of her body. Her hair water now flowed red, like blood pouring continuously from her scalp. Her eyes, once black pools, now burned with actual fire. And her mouth had stretched impossibly wide, revealing not small sharp teeth, but rows and rows of fangs, like a crocodile's, going back into her throat as far as Tubo could see. "Thief," she said, and her voice was no longer like distant thunder, but like the earth splitting apart. "Oath breaker, betrayer. Great goddess, please." Tubo fell to his knees in the canoe, his hands clasped together. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean. I'll return everything. Please." "Return." The goddess laughed, and the sound made the water around them form waves that nearly capsized Tubo's canoe. "You think you can steal from me and simply return what you took? You think 7 years of obedience earn you the right to 1 night of betrayal?" "It was greed," Tubo sobbed. "I was foolish. I was wrong. Please, great goddess, I have children. I have..." "You swore on your children's lives," Ine Ubong interrupted, and now she was floating closer, her transformed body seeming to fool the entire river. 7 years ago, you swore, and now you use those same children as a shield against the consequences of your broken oath. She reached out one hand, no longer webbed fingers, but actual claws, dripping with river water and something darker. "I gave you a simple rule. One rule. Never fish during the full moon. Was that so difficult? Was 7 years of wealth not enough for you?" "It was enough," Tubo cried. "It was more than enough. Please." "I'll never fish again. I'll give away all my wealth. I'll do anything." "No." The goddess's burning eyes fixed on him, and Tubo felt his very soul shrivel under that gaze. "You had your chance for anything 7 years ago. You made a bargain. You broke it. Now you will suffer the price." "What price?" Tubo whispered. though he dreaded the answer. Inu Ubong smiled, showing all those terrible teeth. You wanted the wealth of the river? You shall have it, forever. The goddess pointed at Tubo with one clawed finger, and red light shot from her hand, striking him in the chest. Tubo screamed. Pain exploded through his body, pain like nothing he had ever imagined. It felt as if his bones were melting, his skin was tearing. His blood was turning to water inside his veins. He looked down at his hands and watched in horror as scales began to appear. The same sharp, overlapping scales that covered the goddess's transformed body. They erupted from his skin like crops pushing through soil, spreading up his arms, across his chest, down his legs. No, he shrieked. No, please, stop, stop. But the transformation continued relentlessly. His feet fused together, bones cracking and reforming, until he had not legs but a tail, a powerful fish tail covered in silver scales. His hands remained human, but webbing grew between his fingers, and his nails elongated into claws. His face stretched, his jaw unhinging and reforming, his teeth falling out, only to be replaced by rows of needle-sharp fangs. Gills opened in his neck, and he gasped as his lungs changed, allowing him to breathe water as easily as air.
Yes, behold, the goddess declared, her voice now almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. Tubo the blessed, now Tubo the cursed. Tubo tried to speak, to beg, to plead, but his voice came out as a horrible gurgling rasp, half human, half fish, entirely monstrous. You wanted more fish, Inu Ubong continued. You shall become fish, neither fully human nor fully creature. You will live in these waters forever, serving me as my guardian. You will watch other fishermen come and go. You will see your family age and die. You will exist in torment, remembering what you lost for your greed. She leaned close, her burning eyes inches from his transformed face. And on every full moon, you will feel the pain of this transformation again. Your scales will burn, your gills will tear, your tail will thrash in agony. This is your punishment. Oathbreaker, this is the price of your greed. Tubo tried to grab the sides of his canoe, but his new claws tore through the wood like paper. The canoe began to sink, water rushing in through the holes. Go now to your new home, the goddess commanded, down in the depths where the light never reaches. Guard my waters, frighten away the greedy and the foolish, and remember, always remember, what you chose when you broke your word. Tubo felt the water close over his head as the canoe sank completely. But he didn't drown. His new gills worked perfectly, drawing oxygen from the river. He could breathe, could see clearly even in the dark water, but he could not speak, could not cry out, could not beg for mercy. The last thing he saw before the goddess vanished was her smile. Terrible, knowing, final. Then he sank down, but down into the black depths of the river, dragged by his new tail to the bottom, where the mud was thick and the pressure crushed all hope. And there, in the darkness, he began his eternal sentence. When Tubo didn't return by morning, his family grew worried. By afternoon, they were frantic. By evening, search parties were sent out along the river. They found his canoe 3 days later, or what remained of it. The vessel was in pieces, torn apart by something with terrible strength. Inside the wreckage, they found his nets, still full of those enormous fish and the glittering pearls. But of Tubo himself, there was no sign. The river took him, Old Boma said gravely, examining the wreckage. He picked up one of the pearls, then dropped it quickly as if it had burned him. These are River Goddess pearls. But he must have fished during the full moon, foolish, greedy man. Prey, Tubo's first wife, wept inconsolably. but he always avoided the full moon. He told me it was bad luck to fish then. Why would he break his own rule? Adanma, the second wife, was more pragmatic. He wanted more. The wealth we had wasn't enough for him. He always wanted more. The village held a funeral without a body. They poured libations and sang songs. They praised Tubo's memory, how he had risen from poverty to prosperity, how he had employed many men, how he had been blessed by the river. But old Boma, who knew more than he said, added a different kind of remembrance. "Let Tubo's fate be a warning," he said as the village gathered. "The river gives, and the river takes away. When you make a bargain with powers greater than yourself, you keep your word, always, no matter the cost." The children of Okporo Ama listened, wide-eyed and fearful. "What happened to him, Grandfather Boma?" a young girl asked. "Did he drown?" Boma looked out at the dark waters of the River Nun, flowing endlessly toward the sea. "Something worse than drowning," he said quietly. "He got exactly what he wanted." Years passed, then decades. The story of Tubo the Blessed, who became Tubo the Cursed, spread from Okporo Ama to every fishing village along the River Nun. It changed with each telling, gaining embellishments, losing details, transforming into legend. Some said Tubo had been turned into a giant fish that still swam in the deep waters. Others claimed he'd been dragged down to the goddess's underwater palace to serve as her eternal slave. A few insisted he'd simply been drowned for his greed. There's nothing supernatural about it at all. But the fishermen knew better, because strange things began to happen at the forbidden bend in the river. Fishermen who tried to fish there during full moons reported seeing a creature in the water, something with scales that glittered silver, with claws that could tear through nets, with eyes that still held a terrible, recognizable human intelligence. It would rise from the depths just enough to be seen, would lock eyes with whoever was fishing, and the fishermen would see such anguish, such desperate pleading in that gaze, that they would flee in terror. "That's Tubo," the old fisherman would whisper to the young ones. "Still down there, still suffering, a warning to anyone who thinks they can outsmart the goddess." On full moon nights, the villagers claimed they could hear sounds coming from the river. Not quite screams, not quite the calls of fish, but something in between. A wet, gurgling cry of eternal torment. And the strangest part, the goddess's bargain seemed to remain partially active. Other fishermen, those who were honest, who followed the old rules, who never fished during full moons, sometimes found their nets surprisingly full when they fished near, but not in, the forbidden bend. It was as if the goddess was still keeping her side of the original bargain, still rewarding the worthy while punishing the greedy. But her greatest reward was the warning she'd made of Tubo, a living, suffering example of what happened to those who broke their word, to powers beyond mortal understanding. 20 years after Tubo's disappearance, a young fisherman named Kalango came to Okporo Ama from a distant village. He was ambitious, clever, and hungry for success. He'd heard the stories about Tubo the Cursed, but like many young men, he believed he was smarter, more careful, more deserving than those who had failed before him. "Take me to the forbidden bend," he demanded of old Boma, who was now ancient and walked with a stick. "No," Boma said flatly. "I will not help you meet Tubo's fate." "I'm not foolish like he was," Kalango insisted. "I won't fish during the full moon. I just want to see if the stories are true, if there really are fish that large in those waters." Boma studied the young man with tired eyes. "The fish are real. So is the curse. Leave it alone, boy." But Kalango went anyway, following directions he'd wheedled from a drunk fisherman. He reached the forbidden bend at sunset,
cast his nets, and pulled up a modest catch. Nothing like the legendary hauls Tubo had brought back, but enough to prove the stories had some truth to them. As he prepared to leave, something rose from the water beside his canoe. Kalango nearly capsized in his terror. The creature that surfaced was Nightmare, made flesh. Silver scales covered a body that was grotesquely half human, half fish. Webbed hands with long claws gripped the side of the canoe. The face, oh, the face was the worst part. It was still recognizable as having once been human, but stretched and deformed, with gills that opened and closed in the neck and eyes, that held such profound sadness that Kalango felt his heart might break just looking into them. But there was something else in those eyes too. Recognition, memory, either the remnants of intelligence. The creature's mouth opened, and a horrible sound came out. Words, almost. Broken syllables. A desperate attempt at human speech through a throat no longer built for it. Go away, run. Kalango understood with horrifying clarity. This was Tubo, still alive, still conscious, still trapped in this monstrous form after 20 years. You're trying to warn me, Kalango whispered. The creature nodded, a painfully human gesture from a decidedly inhuman form. Then, it pointed toward the village with one clawed hand, the message clear: leave, don't end up like me. Kalango didn't need to be told twice. He paddled away as fast as his arms could move, the modest catch forgotten in his panic. He never fished those waters again. In fact, he left Okporo Ama entirely the next morning, returning to his home village, where he told everyone who would listen about the cursed fisherman who still suffered for his greed. Down in the dark water, Tubo sank back to the bottom, back to his eternal prison. He tried to warn the young fisherman, had managed to push a few broken words through his transformed throat. It was the most human thing he'd done in 20 years. And for just a moment, he almost felt like himself again. Then the pain of his existence crashed back over him, and he remembered. This was forever. This was his punishment. This was the price he'd paid for wanting just a little bit more. The story of Tubo spread far beyond Okporo Ama, carried by traders and travelers, fishermen and elders, mothers teaching their children about the dangers of greed. In some villages, they sing songs about him. Tubo the blessed who wanted more, Tubo the cursed forevermore. Silver scales and human eyes, living proof that greed's the lie that tells you more is never enough, until you lose everything for stuff. Children are taught to fear the forbidden bend in the river, where the cursed fisherman still dwells. Young people are warned that bargains with spirits and gods must be kept, no matter the temptation. And fishermen across the region have adopted a new custom. Whenever they have a particularly good catch, they throw back the largest, finest fish. For the river, they say. So we remember, we don't own what we take. We're only borrowing it. Old Boma lived to be 97 years old. On his deathbed, surrounded by great-grandchildren, he was asked if the story of Tubo was really true. Every word, he said. I saw his prosperity with my own eyes. I examined the wreckage of his canoe, and once, just once, many years ago, I went to the Forbidden Bend on a full moon night. His family leaned closer. What did you see, grandfather? I saw a creature rise from the water. I saw it look at me with eyes that were still human, still aware. And I heard it make a sound. Not quite a scream, not quite a moan, but something that held all the regret in the world. He closed his eyes. That was when I knew. There are some prices too high to pay, some bargains too dangerous to break. Better to be poor and whole than rich and destroyed. He died that night, and they buried him with honors befitting the village's oldest and wisest elder. To this day, fishermen along the River Nun will not fish the forbidden bend during the full moon. Some avoid it entirely,
believing the curse is contagious, that greed itself might be a disease caught from lingering too long in those waters. But others, the honest, the humble, those who remember to give thanks to the river and take only what they need, sometimes find their nets surprisingly full when they fish nearby. The goddess, it seems, still honors her original bargain with those who honor her in return. And Tubo? Tubo remains in the depths, a guardian placed there by the goddess's curse. He frightens away the greedy and the foolish, protects the sacred waters, and serves as an eternal reminder of what happens when we let desire overrule our integrity. Some say that on the quietest nights, when the river is like glass and the moon is dark, you can see him rise briefly to the surface, not to hunt or to feed, but simply to look up at the stars, remembering what it was like to be human, remembering his wife's laugh, his children's smiles, the simple joy of a modest catch and a meal shared with family, remembering everything he had, everything that should have been enough. The goddess was right, in a terrible way. Tubo had wanted the wealth of the river, and he had received it. He'd become part of that wealth, absorbed into it, trapped within it forever. He got exactly what he wished for. He just never imagined what that would cost. And so, dear listener, the story ends, but its lesson continues. When you make a promise, keep it. When you make a bargain, honor it. When you're given a rule, follow it. Especially when breaking it seems easy, profitable, or unlikely to be punished. Because some rules exist not to restrict you, but to protect you from yourself. Tubo had 7 years of wealth, 7 years of prosperity, 7 years during which he could have been content, could have enjoyed what he'd been given, could have lived a blessed life within the bounds of his bargain. But greed whispers that enough is never enough, that rules are meant to be broken, that you deserve more, always more, just a little bit more. And if you listen to that whisper, if you let it drown out the voice of wisdom and integrity, you might end up like Tubo, alive but not living, aware but not free, wealthy beyond measure in the thing that destroyed you. The next time you're tempted to break a promise for profit, to ignore a warning for gain, to cross a line because you think you can get away with it, remember the fisherman at the bottom of the River Nun. Remember that he thought one more catch wouldn't matter. Remember that he believed he was too smart to be caught. Remember that he forgot the most important truth of all. Some prices are paid not in money, but in pieces of your soul. And once you've sold those pieces, no amount of wealth can buy them back. If this tale moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that true wealth isn't measured in what you accumulate, but in what you're wise enough not to chase. And remember, the river gives and the river takes away. It's not the taking that defines you. It's what you do with what you're given, and whether you know when enough is enough. Subscribe and leave a comment below. What would you have done in Tubo's position? Could you have kept the goddess's rule for 7 years? For 10? Forever? Let's discuss what makes some bargains worth keeping and others too dangerous to make.